My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 31 years old. 2 weeks ago, I stood in a banquet hall filled with 200 people, my brother's wedding guests, my parents' country club friends, business associates who'd known our family for decades, and listened to my mother take the microphone and say, "We're just so proud of Ryan and his beautiful bride." And of course, all of Sarah's little students sent cards. Isn't that sweet? The crowd laughed the way crowds laugh at things that aren't quite jokes. My father nodded from the head table. My aunt smirked behind her champagne flute. And my husband, the man my family had dismissed as a drifter for 3 years, slowly set down his fork, folded his napkin, and stood up. What happened next made my mother's best friend go completely still. Made my father's business partner pull out his phone with shaking hands. Made my brother, my own brother, whose wedding this was, turn to his new wife and mouth the words, "Did you know?" I didn't know either. Not everything. Not yet. Before I get into all of it, please take a moment to like this video if you're enjoying the story so far, and subscribe if you're new here. I'd love to know, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. Now let me take you back to where this really started. I met my husband at a hardware store. Not romantic, I know. I was 30 minutes from my apartment, in a part of the city I never usually went to, because the craft supply store near my school had been out of balsa wood for 3 weeks, and I needed it for my students' bridge building project. My kids were 7 and 8 years old. We had been talking about structural integrity for a month. I was not about to disappoint them. I was standing in the lumber aisle comparing dowel sizes when a man in a worn canvas jacket crouched down beside me and said, without preamble, "The thinner ones will be more flexible, but they'll under compression. Depends what you're building." I looked at him. Dark hair, quiet eyes, early 30s. He had sawdust on his sleeve. "Second-grade bridges," I said. He smiled. "Go with the middle size. More forgiving." His name was Daniel. He said he did structural work consulting mostly. I didn't ask him to explain further because I had 40 minutes before the store closed and a class set of glue guns to account for. He helped me load my cart. We talked about bridges the entire time. Real ones. He knew a lot about real ones. He asked for my number in the parking lot. I gave it to him because he was the first person in a long time who'd asked me a question and actually waited for the full answer. We dated for 8 months before I introduced him to my family. I kept putting it off, and I'm not proud of that. But I knew what they were. My father had built a commercial real estate business from nothing, which he was rightly proud of, but which had also calcified into a certain worldview. Success was measurable, quantifiable, and expressed primarily in square footage and deal size. My mother had grown up with money and treated anyone without it the way some people treat a light rain, mildly inconvenient, not worth fully acknowledging. My brother Ryan was the golden one. MBA from Wharton, junior partner at a consulting firm by 28, the kind of person who introduced himself at parties by listing his accomplishments in ascending order. I loved him. I also knew exactly who he was. And me? I taught second grade at Riverside Elementary, in a part of the city that didn't have a lot to offer its kids except, hopefully, teachers who showed up. I bought my own supplies. I stayed late twice a week. I'd had a student last year, a boy named Marcus, no relation, who'd come to me in September, not knowing how to hold a pencil. By May he was writing 3-sentence stories about dinosaurs. I kept every single one of them. My mother's standard response to any mention of my work was a slight tilt of the head and a change of subject. My father once described what I did as a phase. My brother, to his credit, never said anything directly cruel. He just asked, every single time we were together, if I had thought more about going back to school. He meant business school. He always meant business school. So I waited 8 months to introduce Daniel. When I finally did Sunday dinner, my parents' house, it went almost exactly as I'd expected. My father shook Daniel's hand and asked him which firm he worked for. Daniel said he was independent. My father's smile didn't change, but something behind his eyes went quiet and calculating. My mother asked what independent meant, exactly. Daniel said he took on projects. She asked what kind. He said structural engineering, mostly. She asked if that was like contracting. He said something in between. She nodded with the particular brightness she reserved for things she'd already decided not to take seriously. My brother asked Daniel what his exit strategy was. Daniel looked at him calmly and said, "I'm not looking to exit anything." Ryan laughed like that was a punchline. Daniel smiled like he knew something Ryan didn't. I should have paid more attention to that smile. The pattern established itself quickly. Every family dinner followed the same script. My parents would ask Ryan about his deals, his clients, his trajectory. Ryan would tell them, in detail, while his girlfriend, now fiancée, now wife, listened adoringly. Then one of my parents would turn to me and say something like, "And how are your little ones?" Or, "Still doing the classroom thing?" Or my personal favorite from my mother at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. "Daniel, Ryan's firm is always looking for sharp people. You should let him put in a word." As if Daniel were a stray she was trying to place. Daniel always said thank you and didn't take the bait. I always said nothing and absorbed it like I'd been trained to. We'd drive home in silence and he'd reach over and take my hand, and I'd look out the window and pretend the city lights were interesting. There were specific moments that carved themselves into me. Last spring, my class was chosen to present at the district's student showcase, a big deal for Riverside, a school that didn't get a lot of recognition. My kids had built models, written reports, prepared to speak in front of judges. I'd spent 3 weekends helping them practice. I told my parents a month in advance. I sent a reminder 2 weeks before. I called the morning of. My mother said she had a charity luncheon she couldn't move. My father said he had a call with a developer in Phoenix. Ryan said he'd try, which I knew meant no. Daniel was there for the whole thing. He sat in the front row. He took photographs of every single child who presented. When a little girl named Priya froze at the microphone, it was Daniel who caught her eye from the front row and gave her a small nod, just a nod, and she kept going. They won second place. He framed the ribbon and hung it in my classroom. My family never asked how it went. The second thing that carved itself in happened at Christmas. Ryan and his girlfriend they'd just gotten engaged announced the wedding date over dinner. Everyone moved into wedding planning mode instantly. My mother started talking about venues. My father offered to cover the rehearsal dinner. Ryan asked Daniel casually, almost as a joke, if he'd be doing the centerpieces himself, since that was, apparently, more his speed. Everyone laughed. Daniel laughed too, which was somehow worse. That was the night I found him. An hour later, standing on my parents' back porch in the cold, looking at nothing. "Are you okay?" I asked. He said yes. Then he said, "I've been patient because you asked me to be. But I want you to know something, Sarah. What your family thinks of you is wrong. And at some point, I won't be able to keep not saying so." I told him just a little longer. I don't know what I was waiting for. Some change that was never coming. The wedding invitation came on a Tuesday. Thick cream envelope, gold embossing, Ryan and Cassandra's names in calligraphy across the front. Beautiful. Inside, a handwritten note from my mother on her personal stationery. It said they were so excited, that Cassandra was a dream, that they hoped Daniel could make it if he didn't have any jobs that weekend. If he didn't have any jobs. I read it 3 times. Then I read it to Daniel. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you want to go?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. I thought about sitting at whatever table they put us at, smiling through whatever comments came, watching my brother get exactly the celebration I would never get. I thought about the showcase my family didn't attend. I thought about every holiday where I'd been background furniture in someone else's story. I thought about what I would tell my students if they asked me, one day, whether people could change. "Yes," I said. "We're going." Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Then he walked to the closet, reached up to the high shelf, and brought down a plain manila envelope thick, heavy with papers. He put it on the kitchen table between us. "What's that?" I said. He looked at me steadily. "Something I've been holding on to. I was going to wait for the right moment." He paused. "I think the right moment might be coming." I didn't open the envelope. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of what was inside. Maybe I was afraid that knowing would change something I wasn't ready to have changed. The wedding was at the Alderhurst Grand, the kind of venue that had a coordinator whose sole job was to ensure that every surface reflected light at a flattering angle. 200 guests. String quartet. 3 courses. A sweetheart table for Ryan and Cassandra elevated on a platform so that everyone could see them at all times, which felt both romantic and a little like a performance review. Our table was near the back, beside the doors to the service hallway. I counted the tables between us and the head table. 11. Daniel wore a gray suit. I wore a green dress I'd bought the previous spring. When we arrived, my mother greeted us at the entrance in a champagne-colored gown, her hair done up in a style that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She kissed my cheek. She said, "You look lovely, Sarah, so natural." Then she looked at Daniel's suit and said, "Oh, so casual," and moved to the next guest before either of us could respond. At the head table, Ryan caught my eye across the room and waved. A real wave, warm, and for a second he was just my brother and I missed him. Then, Cassandra tugged his sleeve toward a photographer, and the moment passed. We found our table. A couple I didn't recognize was already seated mid-50s, well-dressed, the woman wearing the particular expression of someone cataloging the room. The man looked up as we sat and nodded. Professional assessment, quick and complete. "Andrew Bellamy," he said, extending his hand to Daniel. "I'm Robert Mitchell's architect on the Hargrove project." Daniel shook his hand and said his name. Something crossed Andrew Bellamy's face. Fast, like a word you almost remembered. He looked at Daniel more carefully. "Whereabouts do you work?" he asked. "Independent consulting, mostly," Daniel said. "Structural side." Andrew's wife turned from her conversation with the woman beside her. She looked at Daniel with the same expression her husband had, that almost recognition. Then she looked at her husband. He gave a small shake of his head, but he kept glancing back. I didn't understand it yet. I would. The ceremony had been earlier, beautiful, Cassandra cried, and Ryan actually cried too, which surprised me and made me love him more than I had in years. The reception was where things went wrong. It started with the toasts. My father went first. He was a good speaker, commanding, easy with a crowd, the kind of man who could make 200 strangers feel like an audience that had been waiting specifically for him. He talked about Ryan's drive, his discipline, how proud he was to have raised a son who understood that success required sacrifice and vision. He said he saw himself in Ryan, which he meant as the highest possible compliment. Then, "And we welcome Cassandra into our family. A woman of real substance and ambition." More applause, Cassandra beamed. "We know you two will build something extraordinary." The Mitchell standard. Laughter. Glasses raised. He looked out at the room. His eyes found me at table 11. "And of course, Ryan's big sister Sarah is with us tonight." He smiled the way people smile when they're about to say something that sounds kind but isn't. "Sarah has always done things her own way. Couldn't convince her to join the business side of things, believe me. We tried." Gentle laughter from the crowd. "But she is very dedicated to her classroom." He said classroom, the way he might say hobby. "And we're glad she and her husband could make it." He raised his glass to Ryan and Cassandra, and that was the end of my mention. I sat very still. Daniel put his hand over mine under the table. My mother's toast was shorter and more direct. She spoke about family, about legacy, about the importance of building your life with intention. She said Cassandra was the daughter she'd always hoped for. She actually said that. The daughter she'd always hoped for. In a room where her actual daughter was sitting 11 tables away. She ended with something that made the air leave my body. "Ryan and Cassandra, you remind me every day that when you raise your children right, it shows." She looked out at the room, let her gaze graze over me, moved on. "The Mitchell name means something. Tonight it means something even more." The applause was warm and genuine, and I couldn't hear any of it because there was a strange ringing in my ears. I was the Mitchell name. That didn't mean something. That was the sentence she hadn't said. Daniel's hand had gone very still over mine. Then Ryan's best man spoke. Then Cassandra's maid of honor. Then there was dancing, and the cake, and the kind of orchestrated joy that costs a lot to produce. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, my aunt found our table. She was my mother's younger sister. She had always been the one who asked follow-up questions about my job in a way that felt like an interview rather than curiosity. She sat in the empty chair beside me, touched my arm, and said, "Your mother gave a beautiful toast, didn't she?" I said yes. "You know she worries about you," my aunt said. "She just wants you to be secure." I said I was secure. "Teaching, though." "Sarah, you're so smart." She glanced at Daniel. "And you? Remind me, what is it you do, exactly?" Daniel looked at her pleasantly. "Structural engineering." She looked at his suit again. "Freelance? Independent consulting." "Right." She patted my arm. "Well, you two are just happy, that's what matters." The way she said it made happiness sound like a consolation prize. She drifted away. I watched her go. I thought about my student Marcus writing dinosaur stories. I thought about Priya at the microphone. I thought about the district showcase ribbon Daniel had framed and hung in my classroom. I thought about the manila envelope on our kitchen table that I still hadn't opened. I turned to Daniel. "The envelope," I said. "What's in it?" He looked at me carefully. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and I realized he'd brought it. He'd had it with him this whole time. Not the envelope itself, something from inside it. A folded document. Thick. The kind of paper that official things are printed on. "I was going to wait until we got home," he said. I said, "Tell me now." He told me. I need to pause here for a second, because what I'm about to tell you is the part that even I still have trouble fully believing, and I lived it. If you've been listening this long, please hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. And I really want to ask, have you ever had a moment where you realized the person closest to you had been quietly doing something extraordinary the whole time you were together? Tell me in the comments, because that is exactly what happened to me. Daniel's full name is Daniel James Caulfield. He'd told me his last name on our second date. I'd never searched it. I'm not someone who searches people. I think it's a strange thing to do to someone you're choosing to trust. So I hadn't. Daniel James Caulfield was the lead structural engineer on the Meridian Bridge in Portland. He was the designer of record on the new wing of the Chicago Children's Science Museum, the one that had been in every architecture magazine 18 months ago. He had, 4 years ago, founded a firm called Caulfield Structural that currently employed 41 people and had been, 6 months before our wedding, awarded the commission for the redesign of a public infrastructure project in 3 cities, the largest contract of its kind, given to an independent firm, in over a decade. He'd been in the Wall Street Journal, twice. He'd been in Architectural Digest. He'd given a talk at MIT that had 300,000 views. He had never told me because I'd asked him, on our third date, not to talk about credentials. I'd said I remembered saying this. "I don't want to know about your resume. I want to know about you." He had taken me at my word in a way I had not anticipated being possible. "Why are you telling me now?" I asked. He said, "Because I have been quiet for 3 years. I was quiet because you asked me to give your family a chance to see you without the noise. And they used that quiet to make you smaller." He looked at me. "I won't let them do it again." I didn't have words. I looked across the room at my father laughing with his business partner, at my mother touching Cassandra's veil, at Ryan, my brother, who'd built his whole life trying to earn a validation that I had stopped chasing and didn't know what to do about anymore. Then something happened that I hadn't anticipated. Andrew Bellamy stood up from our table. He walked directly to my father. I watched them talk. My father's expression shifted, curious, then puzzled. Then the look a person gets when they realize they've been wrong about something in a way that has consequences. He looked back at our table, at Daniel, at me. My father came toward us. I had about 30 seconds to decide what kind of person I was going to be in the next 5 minutes. Daniel stood up before my father reached the table. "Tom," my father said, and then stopped, because he'd used the wrong name, which is something that happens when you've never bothered to learn someone's name correctly despite 3 years of opportunity. "Marcus." "Daniel." "I just had an interesting conversation with Andrew," Daniel said. "I imagine so." My father's recovery instinct was excellent. Decades of business had made him very good at pivoting. He smiled, extended his hand. "I have to say, I didn't realize." We didn't know who we had at our table. He laughed, the easy laugh of a man explaining away a misunderstanding. Diana Sarah told us you were in consulting, but she never mentioned. Daniel looked at him. She didn't know everything. But you didn't ask. My father paused. Well, you're a hard man to read. I'm not, actually, Daniel said. I'm quite straightforward. Your family just wasn't listening. Something flickered across my father's face. Embarrassment, maybe, or the business reflex that looks a lot like embarrassment. By this point, my mother, I noted. She crossed the room with the focused energy of a woman who could sense a social situation requiring management from 50 feet away. She put her hand on my father's arm and smiled at Daniel with the full voltage of her charm. Daniel, she said, we've just been catching up with Andrew. I have to say we're just so impressed. You've been so modest. We had no idea. I said, he wasn't being modest. You didn't ask. My mother blinked at me. In 31 years she had not heard me say anything in that tone of voice, and it showed. Sarah, you gave a toast tonight, I said. My voice was steady. I hadn't known it would be. You said Cassandra was the daughter you'd always hoped for. You said the Mitchell name means something, and I was sitting 11 tables away next to the kitchen. The table had gone very quiet. Andrew Bellamy was looking at his plate. His wife was looking at me. That was not my mother started. I have a student, I said, who came to me in September unable to recognize half the letters of the alphabet. He's 7 years old, and he'd been moved 3 times in 2 years, and every adult in his life had given up on him. By March, he was reading on grade level. I paused. That happened because I showed up every single day. That happened because I stayed until 5 o'clock twice a week. That happened because what I do matters, even though you have never once said so. The music was playing somewhere behind me. 200 people were eating cake. Here, at table 11, everything was very still. My mother's eyes were bright. Of course what you do matters. Then why have you never come to see it? The question came out clean, without anger. Just a question I'd been holding for years. Ryan's office. 12 visits. My classroom showcase. 0. My father opened his mouth. I looked at him. You said in your toast that Ryan understands sacrifice and vision, I said. I have been buying school supplies out of my own salary for 4 years. I have never asked you for anything. I have shown up for this family at every event, every holiday, every birthday, and I have smiled through every comment and every joke and every still teaching, and I am done. I took a breath. I'm not done with you. I'm done performing. There's a difference. Ryan had appeared at the edge of the circle. His bow tie was slightly crooked from dancing. He was looking at me the way he used to when we were children, and I'd said something he couldn't quite process. Sarah, he said. The seating chart wasn't. It's not about the seating chart, Ryan. I looked at my brother, my actual brother, the one I'd shared a house and a childhood and a set of impossible expectations with. It's about the fact that you've been here for 10 minutes trying to understand what happened and you still haven't asked me if I'm okay. He went very still. Are you okay? He said, quietly. Actually asking. I thought about it. I'm getting there. Daniel had been standing beside me through all of it. He hadn't spoken. He hadn't needed to. But now he stepped forward and placed the folded document on the table in front of my father, the one from his inside pocket. This is a proposal, he said. Not for you, for Riverside Elementary. He looked at my father steadily. I'm funding a full STEM lab renovation. Computers, materials, equipment. Sarah's school has needed it for 3 years. I should have done it sooner. He looked at me. I'm sorry I waited. My mother pressed her fingers to her lips. It was the first genuinely unperformed expression I'd seen on her face in years. Andrew Bellamy picked up his glass and drank from it. I don't know exactly what it means when a room changes. But something changed. Not in the lights or the music or the 200 people eating cake somewhere behind me. Something in the small circle of people standing at table 11 near the kitchen doors, at Ryan and Cassandra's wedding reception. Daniel took my hand. I held it. Ryan stepped forward and hugged me. Just that. No explanation, no caveat, no business framing. He just put his arms around me and said, quietly, against my hair. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I really am." And I believed him, because he sounded exactly like the 9-year-old who used to find me after our parents fought and sit beside me without saying anything, because he knew it was what I needed. I hugged him back. We left the reception an hour later. Cassandra stopped us at the door and hugged me too, which I hadn't expected, and said, very simply, "I hope we can do better." I thought she probably meant it. In the car, I didn't cry. I looked out the window at the city and felt the particular kind of exhaustion that comes after you've put something down that was very heavy. Daniel drove. After a while he said, "Are you angry with me for not telling you sooner?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I think you told me exactly when I was ready to hear it." A pause. And when they were ready to see it, he glanced at me. "You didn't need the reveal, you know. What you said to your mother, that was all you." I knew. That was the part I kept coming back to later. The STEM lab, the document, the Wall Street Journal. None of that was what I was proudest of. What I was proudest of was that I'd stood in a room full of my family's most important people and said the word classroom without apologizing for it. The fallout took about a week to fully arrive. My father's meeting with Andrew Bellamy about the Hargrove project went differently than expected. Andrew had apparently spent the car ride home, looking up everything he could find about Daniel's firm, and the conversation shifted considerably. My father called Daniel on Tuesday. Daniel took the call, was polite, and declined any professional involvement. Not with coldness, just clearly. My mother called me on Wednesday. She did not begin with an apology. She began with, "I want to explain what I meant by," and I let her talk for about 3 minutes before I said, gently but directly, "Mom, I don't need an explanation. I need a change." There was a long pause. She said, "What kind of change?" I said, "Come to my classroom, just once. Not because of Daniel's firm or what Andrew told Dad. Just come and see what I do." Another pause. Longer. "Okay," she said. It was a small word. It was the smallest word I'd ever heard her say. She came on a Friday, 3 weeks after the wedding. She sat in one of the small chairs at the back of my room, which are very small, and she is not a small woman, and she sat in one without complaint, and she watched 22 second graders work on a project about the water cycle. She watched a little boy named Theo, who has a processing delay and had been told by someone somewhere that he was slow, explain to his group exactly why the arrows in their diagram needed to point in a specific direction. He got it exactly right. His group listened to him. My mother watched that. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "He's so confident." I said, "I know. He wasn't at the beginning of the year." She watched for another 20 minutes. When the bell rang and the kids scattered, she stood up from the small chair and looked around my room, the student artwork, the word wall, the showcase ribbon Daniel had framed, now hanging between the windows. She said, "I didn't know it was like this." I said, "You didn't ask." She didn't argue with that. She looked at the ribbon for a moment, and then she looked at me. "I'd like to start asking," she said. "That's not everything. Probably it never will be." My father and I had coffee the following week, and it was difficult and uncomfortable, and we said some things that were honest, in ways that family usually protects itself from being. Ryan and I have been texting more, not about business, just about things, the way we did when we were young and the world was smaller, and we hadn't yet learned to perform for it. Daniel and I sat on our back steps last weekend with takeout from the place around the corner, and I asked him what he wished he'd done differently. He said, "I would have told you sooner. Not about the firm, about how clearly I could see what they were doing to you. I thought quiet was respectful. I think it might have just been easy." I said, "You stood up eventually." He said, "You stood up first." I've been thinking about that since. The STEM lab renovation breaks ground next month. My kids don't know yet what's coming, the new computers, the makerspace, the equipment we've been cobbling together from donations, and my own pocket for 4 years. I'm going to tell them on a Monday, because Mondays are hard enough, and they deserve something good to start the week with. On the refrigerator, I have a drawing Theo made for me last week. It's a bridge stick figure, simple, crayon blue, with little people standing on it, arms up, smiling. He said it was for the construction teacher. He meant Daniel. He's seen Daniel at pickup. He doesn't know anything about firms or commissions or journal articles. He just knows that Daniel is the person who fixed the leg on our reading table when it wobbled, and therefore Daniel builds things, and therefore Daniel is the construction teacher. I look at that drawing when I need to remember what matters. I spent a long time waiting for my family to decide I was worth something. I don't think I'll spend any more time on that. Not because I've stopped loving them, I haven't, but because I finally understand what I would tell my students if they asked. Your value isn't a thing that gets assigned. It's a thing that exists, whether someone acknowledges it or not. I've known that for years in my classroom. I'm only just learning it for myself. And honestly, I think I'm going to be okay. Thank you so much for being here until the very end. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible to the people who should have seen you clearest, I really hope you know that what you do matters, even when no one's watching. Hit subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this one. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done differently? See you in the next one.